CEO of Aurora and a CMU alum, called CMU the birthplace of self-driving vehicles. Again, Carnegie Mellon University, the birthplace of self-driving vehicles. This move is another example in Pittsburgh's robust technology ecosystem, especially related to the region's leading edge in autonomous vehicle research and industry. But there's no doubt Pennsylvania is a leader in AVs. We developed, launched, and updated industry standard testing guides for AV stakeholders in PA. We are a participant in the U.S. Department of Transportation's pilot automated vehicle transparency and engagement for safe testing, aimed at improving the safety and testing transparency of automated driving systems. We're also a participant in Partners for Automated Vehicle Education's Public Sector Advisory Group, a group of public sector organizations aimed at educating consumers about AVs and their broader impacts on society. And of course, we have our annual Autonomous Vehicle Summit, which brings us to where we are right now. With that, we can move to our first presenter today, my good friend, Audrey Russo, President and CEO of the Pittsburgh Technology Council. Audrey?
Hello, everyone. I think you can hear me, and I am going to start. I am thrilled to be here with all of you. Thank you, Dennis, for the wonderful introduction and for setting the stage, and for most of all, having these conversations and having them on a regular basis, because through the conversation that I'm going to have, thank you all for joining, the conversation that I'm going to have with all of you is really about reiteration and the importance of having these conversations all across our world. It's not just our ecosystem, but it's our world. So if you will just indulge me, I know you're all here, so you expect some indulgence, but we're going to be talking about, in my piece, we're going to talk about the future is now, safety, and obviously technology and policy. And for most of you who know the work at the Pittsburgh Technology Council, while we work, with over 1,100 companies across southwestern Pennsylvania and actually outside of Pennsylvania, we're really focused on making sure that this is an amazing place for people to build business and to create innovation. And automation, and paired as well with electric vehicles, are really part of our priorities, and it's here to stay. So, but what many of you might not realize is that when I arrived in Pittsburgh, I actually worked for Alcoa and had a chance to work for Paul O'Neill. And he taught us early on about the ubiquitousness and the priority of safety, and safety being number one. So I want to start the conversation here around safety. So first of all, if you just go into your Twitter account today, I'm sure that you can find that there was some fatality. There was some fatality in a vehicle crash. And in Pennsylvania, yesterday I looked it up, there were 3 people who died, unfortunately, I believe in Lancaster County, of fatalities. And the reason why I'm talking about safety first, because if we don't pay attention to understanding what the problems are that we've had with automobiles and with vehicular safety, that in and of itself is enough for us to all say that having autonomous vehicles is actually an imperative. And we're at an inflection point that we haven't been at for at least 100 years. That's the exciting part. But if I can just penetrate to all of you to think that almost 38,000 Americans died in motor vehicle traffic crashes last year. Okay, so just think about that. In 2020, during the pandemic, when many people were actually not driving, we had that kind of those kinds of numbers, and those were the largest totals. That it's not going down. Okay, so every racial group actually increased in fatalities, and I'm extracting a lot of this data. At the end of my slideshow, I have references to all that I've sort of amassed so that we could talk about this today and I could share with you. So in Pennsylvania, essentially 3 people die a day in automobile related fatalities. So that can be actual automobile crashes, and it includes pedestrians. And if you also want to paint the picture that in Pennsylvania, we actually have a very high number of people who are over the age of 70, that seniors tend to have the highest rates of isolation and access to mobility. So I'm trying to paint a story for everyone so that you realize why the support of autonomous vehicles based on our assets here really is not only natural, but it's based upon the roots of the work that we've done here. The other point, and we're at a period of awakening, hopefully in America, but to be really cognizant that the COVID-19 left Black and Latino workers less likely to be able to work from home than any other groups because of the nature of the work that they were doing, service-related work. The industries that got even hit the hardest were also some of the industries that required people to be at work. And so public transportation was running at this lowest capacity. I know in Pittsburgh, we were probably running at 85% below capacity on our mass transit, as well as you think about the airport. Pedestrian accidents were highly concentrated in actually low income neighborhoods. So if that's not enough for everyone to understand that we have to move towards autonomy, and I'm trying to move my screen, there's more. I still want to talk about safety. That road crashes are the #1 cause of death in the US from ages 1 to 54. So I'm painting this picture. It is a little bit of alarmist, but I think all of us just need to remember why this innovation is so important and what kinds of things are going to change. We should have a target in Pennsylvania, in the world, but let's just talk about Pennsylvania. And of course, in terms of Pittsburgh, the target should be taking, vehicular deaths to 0. We used to call that, when I worked in manufacturing, is just a 0 tolerance. No one ever should lose a life, right? You go to work and you expect that your loved ones are actually going to come home at the end of the day. But we've actually grown numb as a society to accepting auto fatalities. We just have. And, whether we could talk about that from a sociological phenomena or love of automobiles or the way that we've been reinforced, I could talk about that even under other circumstances and opportunities. There's lots of excessive speed, distractions, etc. None of us humans can keep up and remain safe and do this kind of multitasking, particularly around being in an automobile. We can't see fog, we can't smell rain, we can't adequately adapt. And autonomous vehicles actually can do that for us, and they can actually operate and comply within laws and regulations. And those laws and regulations can begin to adapt over time so that we are creating environments where we're safely testing and deploying vehicles that are going to be able to amass through artificial intelligence, the embody this inside of any kind of AV vehicle. The other thing is, just remember, AVs don't have road rage, right? They're not offended if someone cuts them off. They don't know if they're having a bad day. It doesn't matter. They don't get bored. The neural net, and that's a piece in terms of artificial intelligence, is the accumulation of data so that you can become safer and more efficient in time. And humans don't essentially do that when they're wrapped in steel. But when you have autonomous vehicles, that neural net is constantly growing and expanding. So quality of life, we've seen that through seniors. We've seen that, the lack of access, people who are living in more remote areas, even in suburban areas, and people with disabilities not having access. We're going to see some information that I've extracted from reports of Bain and PwC, and what the likelihood is in terms of where the tipping point will be, where owning a vehicle versus having some sort of robot / AV kind of taxis will actually be at a tipping point where it won't make sense anymore to have anything that's not automated. So this is really about saving lives and making life better. And sometimes people don't understand that, and I just wanted to make sure that we hit that home as we have this conversation around autonomous vehicles. So, what are some of the realities? The realities are that electric vehicles, and I'm going to munge a little bit of that in here, electric vehicles are going to rise just exponentially. So we're going to be at an inflection point, it's anticipated, in 2024, right? I don't know about you, I just bought a hybrid. I can't believe how little gasoline I use and how irked I actually become when I'm using gasoline. So that's and if someone would have told me that I would have bought that in 2021, I would have said, nah, probably a few years out. But it shifts your mindset. It really does. And autonomous vehicles, and we've already seen evidence of autonomy through Tesla and other companies that are actually embedding that in their automobiles, that it will really be another inflection point where it be accepted in 2028. That's not that far away. That is right around the corner. So for those of us who do planning and look at urban design and regional development, that's within our vision. The automotive industry, though, is facing, such a massive disruption, right? That PwC talks about there's really these four components. There's going to be disruption, thank you to autonomous vehicles, but also ride sharing. What does that look like? How do we collaborate? How do vehicles, and that's not necessarily just the great work that Uber has done, and now Aurora has absorbed some of it, but it's almost on every aspect of how people think of transportation. And then this vehicle electrification, that's definitely transforming the auto industry, and connectivity, the connectedness of vehicles and infrastructure and the information of things. We see an example of that in a company here in Pittsburgh called Locomation. There's plenty of other examples around the United States, but the importance of connected vehicles, communication through autonomy, making sure, the different kinds of skill sets that are required. All of that is shifting the automobile industry, and it is our opportunity here in Pennsylvania, and absolutely selfishly in Pittsburgh, for us to harness that and to figure out some ways that we really can harness that. So if I shift into thinking about, so we talked about some realities, we talked about safety. Now I want to talk about what are some of the opportunities and some of the assets that we're actually resting on. And we really are. This is not just me being a braggart and being bullish on what's happening across Pennsylvania. But if you look at southwestern Pennsylvania, we have a long history in supply chain for automakers. There's not so many of our multinational conglomerates that are here, and companies have deep roots in the auto industry, and they've been pivoting themselves, but they've also participated in a lot of the innovation in autonomy and autonomous vehicles. I just want to refresh everyone that Carnegie Mellon has had over 4 decades of research. I mean, they have been initially silently leading the way, but their research can go back to, the early, I think 1980 even, in terms of autonomous trucking and robots, et cetera. When people thought that there was no way that was going to be in our lives, here we are at this critical point that we are going to finally move into rapid commercialization. So we have those assets that are here, deep amount of not only research, but government investment into that work has been, a legacy here. So the disruption in automotive is really now. It's probably for the first time in the whole, history of automobiles. And this is what I would say, I call it a revolution. And I mean that in a kind way. I mean that it's really a time for something radical. And what you can see is the proliferation of all this innovation and technology that's really amassed themselves, particularly in southwestern Pennsylvania, that's been like a concentric circles around the work at Carnegie Mellon University. But so, some of the opportunities might be, you might say, well, there are other places that are actually, spawning this innovation, and why Pittsburgh? And I would say the reasons that we have all these multinational companies here that are doing this deep work in chemicals and in glass and in paint and, in modeling. I would also say that the opportunities for us in this region are the other companies and the emerging companies who aren't here now. They're not here now. Lucid, for example, which, by the way, is a car that one day I would love to have. And if you've never seen Lucid, just go out and check out the Lucid Air. And no, I'm not a paid influencer for them, but I love that car. Tesla and all the other emerging companies, they don't really have a shingle here in Pennsylvania or anywhere in southwestern Pennsylvania. But yet we have the adjacencies and we have the markets here. So I would say that's a huge opportunity, and I think it's one that we should work on in the near term in terms of attracting those companies. So, and I also want to say in terms of an asset is that RIDC, which is an organization that's been around in southwestern Pennsylvania for about 66 years, I believe, they've been a leader in developing commercial space for the robot companies. We've seen proliferation in Lawrenceville. We've seen proliferation in different areas where there's been regrowth, which was called like Hazelwood Green and Mill 19. They have been retaining almost all of the robotics companies that are known across the world that have their hub here. So we actually have capability in understanding what the needs are for those companies. And I just listed a few of them. Some of them all of you should have heard of: Argo, Uber. Dennis made reference to Aurora, Locomation, Aptive Motional, Carnegie Robotics, Seagrid, etc. There's many of them, and they're actually tenants of RIDC. So we have the assets here to attract robot companies, and we understand what they need and what they're looking for. So here's the deal. What can we do? What can we really do? And that's sort of trying to appeal to all of you. Is to continue to advocate, continue to advocate for the investment and the support of world-class research, right? And if we look at NRAC, which is the National Robotics Consortium, that's part of Carnegie Mellon, that's been there for almost 4 decades. We got to continue to advocate, all of us that are in policy roles, that are in leadership roles, that work with elected officials, are elected officials, to understand that this is a new piece of economic development for Pennsylvania that is not based on 1980s or 1970s strategies on attracting companies here. So the other thing is, I kicked this off talking about safety, but we need to regularly have conversations with and really highlight all the time the innovators who are powering this industry. They're powering this industry here, and their view is to conquer this around the world. These regular kinds of conversations will start to deconstruct the myths around autonomous vehicles. So first of all, I want to thank this group here today and Dennis's leadership for convening the leaders in AV here in Pennsylvania and making sure that Pennsylvania is where the world is pointing to. And again, selfishly, I'm always going to say Pittsburgh, that southwestern Pennsylvania should be where that hyper laser point is. We could work on helping, for example, here in Pittsburgh, we have Visit Pittsburgh. I know there's convention centers and other visitor attraction organizations all across the state to attract and cultivate international conferences on autonomy. Have them here. Always convene them here. Again, I can't reinforce enough how much I appreciate having these kind of continual conversations every month about autonomous vehicles, because I think it's that kind of reiteration that will debunk some of the myths. We can support the airport. All efforts in supporting our airports are really critical. It has to be easy for people to come and go. It has to be a place where air travel is seamless, and through that, we have to make sure that we are advocates for all things around innovation in our airports. And I would say the same thing for mass transit as well, because that will also help people think differently about vehicles and about cars. So working closely with industry, which is something that I have the pleasure of being able to do in southwestern Pennsylvania, is to make sure that all of our voices can articulate that we want to embrace AV, but we want to do that so that we can ensure that there's adequate testing and that deployment actually can happen, and that we're not fearful about that we're just not fearful. That's sort of part of our DNA. It should be just as proud. It should be articulated just as we used to be before I lived here in terms of steel. We should be just as proud and hanging that flag and talking about that all the time across all cross sections of our economy. So the education and the safety and benefits with, just a really active campaign about the changes that not only are coming, but the things that we're doing. And just to remind us all, autonomy is everywhere already. We don't talk about that enough in aircraft and trains and buses. Autonomy is all there. It's embedded every year in these cars. We're seeing new and more innovative solutions that are actually embedded in existing cars, not ones that are just completely autonomous. So, safety just matters. And I think we've become too complacent in terms of how we feel about loss of life and how that impacts us each and every day when it comes to vehicular accidents. And I've done a bunch of research with the National Transportation Department, and all the data that they put out. I mean, it's a little horrifying, and we should not be so numb to that. And then support our elected officials and help our elected officials and help them learn how these solutions actually work, and so that they can have it at the tip of their tongue, so that they can actually understand when they're talking to their constituents that they're breaking down those myths as well. And our objective is really to save lives and create efficiency. So supporting policies, that's what we will continue to do at the Tech Council, to make sure that there is, robust testing and there's robust deployment, and that they are focused on consistency and safety focus, and know that we're working towards a zero tolerance. So I also want to add just a couple of more things, and then I'm thinking that my time is probably up. But this artificial intelligence and the enhanced driving, right? This driving assistance systems, because we're all seeing that in vehicles. It's not just the car of my dreams like Lucid Air, but we're seeing that in new cars that are being released right now in 2021. This whole deep learning allows us to have real-time, maps. It allows us for safety. It allows us for guidance, and it allows us to be able to have compounded algorithms, so that there are, what it's called the neural network, that net effect that allows us to have additionally more and more information, so that the autonomous vehicle can provide the safest environment, the most autonomous environment, because all fatalities are occurring by the human hand. And so to me, that's really exciting, and that should be exciting to all of you, and it should be exciting to those people who probably don't have as much information, but that we have to debunk the fear. And trust and perceived usefulness is really the bottom line in terms of what shifts any technology adoption. It doesn't matter if it's Slack or Plaid or autonomous vehicles or any of the tools that we use. Just think about the shift that we've made from banking. The trust and the perceived usefulness, when you combine both of those things together, is what shifts technology adoption. So policy design, I encourage policy design which thinks about infrastructure, and I know that's a big word now, that it spans around people and around supports and around systems, but AV and vehicle electrification all at once. Think about that. That's what the world is going to be within less than 2.5 years. It's coming, it's happening. Let Pennsylvania remain at the epicenter of this work. So economic development strategies is my final point that I want to share with you. Have to move into the 21st century, which means workforce and embracing innovation is the queen. Notice I said queen, not king. And subsidies are very 1980s. That is not why people come here. That is not why people innovate. It is not, you don't create tomorrow through older models of economic development and innovation. So encouraging innovation and supporting policy that focuses on safety and testing, and make sure that we are able to test, that we're able to test on our streets, and that we're able to amass information so that we iteratively get better and better, and we support these autonomous vehicle companies that just are proliferating here in southwestern Pennsylvania. And we also need to have, sort of at the tip of our tongue, the familiarity with the obstacles which impede innovation and innovation in mobility. Because by the way, other states are, and that's what we're competing with. So I want to thank you for your time. I put some references in here. If you're interested in finding out a little bit more, I'm very passionate about this subject. I can't thank you enough for giving me the opportunity to share some of my thoughts about the importance of this. So thank you, Dennis. I think I pass it back to you.
Thank you, Audrey. And as usual, Audrey, that was an incredible presentation. We really appreciate everything. I really appreciate, especially when you talk about the long live the Queen. I mean, and subsidies. As somebody who has to deal with that on a
Right.
daily basis, you are absolutely right. And it's not only technology and innovation. It's also talent. And that where the talent is, that's what's going to attract companies. So
Right.
really appreciate everything you had to say. I did have a chance to take a look at the Lucid Air. It's a bit out of my price range right now, but hopefully in a couple of years the price will come down.
Well, here's my offer to you, Dennis. You and I, we co-share that car.
That's a good. I may take you up on that. That sounds good. Thanks, Audrey. Appreciate everything. Okay.
Thank you. I will stay here, but I'm going to go on mute.
Thank you. Thank you. So our next presenter is Vincent Valdez, and Vincent is the Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission's Executive Director, SPC, and he's done a great job in his short time here so far. And Vincent had a chance to meet Vincent and really appreciate some of his thoughts and ideas that he has coming into the Pittsburgh region. So Vincent, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Secretary Davin. I really appreciate being here. And I can't imagine a better leadoff batter than Audrey on some of the points that she was making in terms of the importance of strategic planning and thinking on automation. I hope everyone can see the slideshow that I have here. And what I wanted to do was really kind of explore some of the aspects that Audrey was talking about from a planning perspective. I think it's really important where she says that we've reached an inflection point and that this is really about making people's lives better. I think, it's safe to say, if you can see the presentation, that transportation has changed more in the last 10 years than it did in the previous 75. I think with the advent of artificial intelligence, certainly automation and automated vehicles, virtual connectivity, it really forces us to think about the operational models that emerge from those technologies and really how they serve people. I think there's more need than ever to think about what these technologies mean to our society and how we can make long-term decisions around many of the issues that surround these transportation modes, and particularly automation, because these are large-scale investments, and these are not things that are going to be cheap to invest in, and they will have significant impacts on our social fabric. What's
Vincent,
that? Yes.
sorry, right now we're seeing your notes slide, not your
Okay.
actual slideshow.
Okay. Sorry. Let's see. Let me go back. Interesting. Stop sharing. Let's see. Yeah, for some reason it's not cooperating. Can you see it now?
Is still the notes page.
Oh, that's odd. Huh. Yeah, because what I have up is my actual slides. Do you mind actually running through the slides if you have them?
Yes, I can do that.
Okay, thank you. Perfect. Proof positive that technology sometimes fails. Thank you very much. Yep, that's where we are right now. Yep. So to pick up where we were before, if everyone can see that, it's really a discussion of how these technologies really respond to social and demographic changes in our societies, in our communities. I think it's an issue for the general public. What we have to really do when we think about this technology, and again, Audrey alluded to it, is that we have to think about the value proposition for these technologies and the projected benefits of automation. I don't know that that's been firmly established yet, but I think there's an important part of this discussion to really talk to the general public about what that means. The bottom line is that no one's made that case yet. And given the social focus that we're seeing all around us in terms of equity and evolving preferences, people really need to think about where we're going with these technologies. Again, we've seen recently how connectivity, broadband, if you will, has really changed the way we interact. In fact, what we're doing today with its glitches represents that. But again, think about what the unintended consequences might be in automation, and it would really serve us all to anticipate those and try to estimate what they might be. And think about how we adopt these technologies from a planning perspective. Next. Of course, what we're here to talk about is automation, but you can't talk about automation without linking it to the things that people want to do on a daily basis. Again, building a transportation system that responds to people's needs and provides societal benefits and good service to everyone who depends on it. We depend on transportation for so many things, from going to school, going to work, thinking about where we want to perhaps go to dinner, all of the aspects of our lives that are really qualitatively important to the individual. Transportation is a means to an end. It's the way that we actually connect to all of these. And I would dare say, we've been talking about here at SPC, that access is the link to equity, that access is a manifestation of equity, that if you can ensure access, you're really supporting the issue of equity, which has become such an important issue in our society. I don't think it's too much of a leap to say that these decisions and this approach really will have a big impact in terms of our social stability and our prosperity as a region and as a country. Next. So in recent discussions, in talking about a framework and thinking about how access and equity and mobility and connectivity play a role, in previous presentations, I've spoken about, if you will, the democratization of infrastructure, particularly the transportation infrastructure, and the need to provide access fairly across all communities. If you think about transportation and particularly the new technologies that are emerging, they really are about community building. The working assumption here is that mobility and connectivity, actually, to whatever extent we can deploy them, are really the means for providing, or one of the basis pieces for providing that equity. And by the way, with respect to connectivity, which is certainly a topic for another day, but certainly important to us all, that's a conversation about it being perhaps the newest transportation mode. Automation is another new way of looking at our transportation. And so again, thinking differently about how we implement that across the board is super important. And as part of the democratization of infrastructure, we proposed here 8 assumptions or principles that would lead to better decision-making in terms of financing our transportation and our infrastructure. And I won't go into a lot of detail here on them because I've been at other presentations where I've spoken in depth about it, but I will cover them here. And I'll describe them because I do think that it's an important framework for thinking about deploying and adopting automated vehicles. Next. There are 8 of these pillars that we've been discussing here in terms of planning and community building and the adoption of automation and other new technologies. And I'll start with the premise that public transportation is here to stay. Audrey mentioned that perhaps in the future, automation and automated vehicles would be more of a kind of a taxi service for the individuals. I would dare say, and I suppose this is my background from the Federal Transit Administration, I would dare say that probably automation will also really be more like public transportation. I think we will see fleet use of automation. I think we will see new ways of providing, for example, bus rapid transit in an automated way, and that the real kind of operational tenets of automation will really be manifested through public transportation. And so it's a basic part of our communities. And I think we will see automation enhance those capabilities. Obviously, telemobility is here to stay, what we're doing today. It represents a basic shift in our society, that inflection point that Audrey was talking about, as does automation. So again, how will that play against automated technology and automated vehicles in this future scenario and in the planning scenario that we have to be taking into account as we think about deploying this technology? New service models are going to play a greater role in our transportation network. Part of the thing that we've seen, I mentioned that we've probably changed in terms of transportation in the last 10 years more than we had in the previous 75. We've seen new ways of providing service, whether it was TNCs or micromobility or microtransit or all of these new service models. We've seen them emerge in the last 10 years, and I think we will see new ways of applying or new modes and new service models emerge from automation as well. And again, thinking of that as an important piece of the planning element and the adoption of new technologies, taking that into consideration. I think also, number 4, it'll become increasingly important to really get the biggest bang for the buck from our existing infrastructure and any new infrastructure that we invest in. It's no secret that infrastructure is very expensive. When you commit yourself to investing in this technology or in the infrastructure, it's a long-term commitment, and we have to be assured that we're making the right decisions and the ones that are most equitable and provide the most social benefit to the greatest number of people. Again, thinking about how we deploy this and how we deploy it efficiently. Next slide. Again, virtual retail, and Audrey mentioned it, virtual retail is now part of the way we do business. And that's going to certainly have an impact and is already having an impact on our streets and our arterials. And it's something that's going to continue to grow. And with automation, with automated vehicles, with automated technology, I think we will continue to see that growth, and we'll need to accommodate that on our existing streets and ensure, again, that there's equitable distribution of this very important service. I mean, this is something that has in some places supplanted brick and mortar. In other places it supports it. But again, it's really part and parcel of the way we do business. And it has to be a planning factor. It has to be considered in how we plan our communities and do and ensure that there is equitable access to this very important aspect. I think we're also seeing, number 6, that communities are really interested in creating smaller villages, if you will, that they cluster activities and that we have multimodal hubs. I think people are not as interested in being caught in traffic anymore. They don't want to wait 45 minutes for a bus. They want to see services and these wonderful assets near where they live. And so it'll challenge us to think about community and challenge us to think about how automated vehicles and how automated travel will impact the shape of that community and the forms that they take. Again, thinking that about how we will take on land use as well in terms of the ecosystem. Really, 6 and 7 are connected. They really are kind of hand in glove in terms of thinking about land use organically, thinking about land use as as again not just a commodity, but as a way of manifesting community building and providing better assets and better service to the people who live in them. And then there's number 8, and I think there's no question that environmental concerns are with us and they're real, and we're living it in terms of what's going on today in the West and what's going on in terms of increasing storms. Apparently this year we had the earliest hurricane in recorded history. Obviously, transportation plays an important role in mitigating and mitigating this and serving to really think about how we are treading a little bit more lightly, how we are thinking about smart and green transportation. I've always been a big advocate for CASE, or that is to say connected, automated, shared, and electric vehicles. And in thinking about adopting the technology, we have to think in a systematic way and think about what the external impacts are going to be. Again, not just the transportation for the sake of the transportation, because we can do it, but thinking about the impacts in a greater sense to include the environment. Next. So where does automation come in? I guess the first question we have to ask ourselves is, how does automation serve the 8 pillars that I just mentioned? Again, this is a notional framework here. My point is that we really do need to think about an implementation framework, but this is one that, again, is a challenge for people to think about in terms of going beyond just the application of the technology. But how do we develop frameworks for adopting this technology that really promotes community and mobility and does it better than what we've had up until now? Where do we go to answering the issue of how we provide that service, at that granularity of service to people who really need it on a daily basis? Again, this is a matter of knowing your why. One of my favorite actors, and it's interesting, I was talking to one of my colleagues here today. One of my favorite actors is Jeff Goldblum, who actually happens to be from West Homestead. He's from around here. And in Jurassic Park, he says, the scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could do something that they didn't stop to think if they should. We should be thinking about that should. We should be thinking about how we perhaps anticipate unintended circumstances, think about community building, think about equity, think about access for people, and think about how automation can serve that. Next. So this is about talking about, investing in a value proposition. Obviously, automation stands to improve safety. Audrey mentioned that, and in many discussions, that's certainly one of the basic premises of automation. But again, increasing traveler satisfaction or perhaps potentially reducing operating costs, improving convenience, because again, you're talking about preferences now that have changed societally, and improving frequency of service and flexibility, expanding hours and areas. Again, that customer satisfaction, that externality, that thinking about where does that technology take us in terms of the user public. And again, adopting this technology, which I think in many respects is inevitable, in the highest use manner that we can. Again, maximizing, optimizing the potential for this technology so that we're not just talking about getting from point A to point B, but that we're creating opportunities for education, economic opportunities, better communities, places that people want to live. That's super important in making this, again, value, this case study or this value proposition for automation. Next. Let me just end here by perhaps proposing some notional next steps. I think that would help the cause of adoption of automation. I think there are some practical things that we can do in the short term. The first of which I think is to really, again, make that public business case for the use of this technology. Without the buy-in of the traveling public, without the general public's buy-in, I think there's no hope of really broad acceptance of this game-changing technology, and it really is game-changing. We really do need to think about how we articulate the business case for automation and what does it mean for me and for every individual. And that's an important discussion that I think needs to be emphasized and explored more than we have up until recently. I think we also need to really kind of identify and resolve legislative, jurisdictional, legal barriers to testing and deploying automated vehicles. That's something certainly that we're working on here, I think in Pennsylvania. I know other states are doing it as well. I remember working at FTA how a number of states were really looking at making themselves really kind of automation friendly destinations. I think that these legalistic issues, these jurisdictional issues, these legislative issues are probably more difficult than some of the technological ones. I have every faith that the good engineers and the scientists out there will be able to solve easily the technological problems. I think the other barriers that we have in place will require, I think, out of the box thinking to really kind of get us to that place where we're creating an environment where automation can really be explored to its maximum extent. And then to develop a framework for safe and effective automation demonstrations. Again, Audrey mentioned some of that. I think we have that here in this state. I think it's important to continue to do that, particularly as the capabilities of the technologies expand. I think also as we start to think about the societal benefits, if we can provide demonstrations and showcases where we're showing the benefits that are not just in terms of the A to B or the ability of sensor arrays to work in a certain way, but that we're thinking about the societal benefits on downstream for individuals who might be taking advantage of this technology. I remember in thinking about the Smart City Challenge, again, I was at FTA when this happened. In fact, I was on one of the selection committees, and it was an important discussion about what Columbus, they were the winner, of course, about what they were really thinking about in terms of who that technology was going to serve. They really did a very good job of articulating who the technology was going to serve. I think that's an important aspect as we take this through from demonstrations to ultimate deployment. Ultimately, this is about demystifying automation for a population that doesn't necessarily have the technical sophistication to really understand the potential benefits, the potential unintended circumstances or consequences, and who really do need to be sold on the importance of this technology for the benefit of our region, for the benefit of our state, and for the benefit of the country. Next, that's it. And I am looking forward to the discussion at the end. And thank you, Secretary Davin, for inviting me to speak here today.
Thank you, Vincent. That was incredible. Really appreciate your thoughts on this. Couple of things just real quick that came up. I thought from some of the things that you said that, and you kind of laid these out in a very practical manner. You know, when you talked about infrastructure and the cost of infrastructure, and the fact that you know you need to make sure that if you're actually this is what legislators look at, you know, the cost benefit analysis. But if you're spending that much money on infrastructure, you have to make sure that you're getting the best value, the most value out of that infrastructure. So that to me that really resonated, and I think that's an argument that would resonate with some of the folks that would, you know, change the permitting, that some of the folks that would allow and fund some of the things that we need to do as we move forward. And then in terms of, you know, just from a practical perspective, you know, you hit the nail on the head. You need to develop a business case. We need to develop a business case that's clear and succinct on why this makes sense to do. You know, whatever part of this discussion that we have, why, or whatever we need to do next, why we need to do that, and what is the business case for that. So I appreciate that. I thought it was very practical and really enjoyed your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next up, we have Mark Thomas, and Mark is the president of the Pittsburgh Regional Alliance. And looking forward to what your presentation, Mark. So thanks so much for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Sounds good. First, I'd like to say I'm just happy to be here. It is an honor of my life to really represent the broader Pittsburgh region and attracting investment here. I would like a quick commercial break that is relevant to today's conversation. So great. And I felt like Brian said exactly what I want to put a footnote on today as I really close out the presentation section. Whereas Audrey really mapped out the broader challenges, and what is exciting about Pittsburgh is that we are a place where people solve the world's biggest problems. And that is really relevant when you get to understand the ecosystem and just the types of people who are attracted to our region. And then Vince provided a much broader kind of policy framework for how we can actually adopt technology. What I'd like to leave you with is really the case for Pittsburgh being a place for automation and autonomy really booming and transforming the world. And there are really five things I want to leave you with, which I'll outline. First, we already have a booming tech ecosystem. The second is that we're a leader across AV, AI, and advanced manufacturing, and these are really the key components that will drive forth the technology. The third, you hear a lot about talent. We're a top place where people in the industry are already here, but also we're really trying to grow that area. Fourth, and obviously, when the technology is rolled out, we won't be the only market where that happens. And so Pittsburgh is nicely positioned to really be a hub for where we see the innovation expanding across the US, but also North America. And the fifth, which is really a product of today's conversation, is you'll have full support from the public sector and entities like mine at the PRA that really want to see companies and inventors and talent and institutions that want to transform autonomy flourish in our region. So I'll give a quick overview of just the broader tech ecosystem. And today's presentation is really for companies, for people who are looking at new markets and want to understand why Pittsburgh, and also for our peers who are within Pennsylvania who want to understand also why Pittsburgh, but why Pittsburgh is a leader and poised to really be in even further at the forefront of where we're heading. One thing that makes our region unique is our technology, our innovation really intersects to a lot of different sectors. And so across the board, whether it's logistics, sustainability, manufacturing, energy production, life sciences, we really have technology and creators who are really transforming each of those sectors in their own way. And that is a remarkable thing. And you see that really reflected in the companies, in the institutions that have created a presence here in Pittsburgh. And something that we're really proud of that is reflected in all the different company and logos that you see on this chart. More broadly, over 300 different venture capital firms and funders are investing in technologies and innovations within our 10-county region. And for a small market, that is quite impressive. And so what is happening in Pittsburgh is not a secret to people who really are looking for deep technologies and transformative things to invest in. So I'll talk now with how autonomous innovation really fits within that broader ecosystem. And something that we've prioritized in our own economic development strategy at the PRA in the Allegheny Conference, is really making it very clear that we view this as one of our anchor industries and part of our future moving forward. And so when you look at the areas that really make up autonomous innovation, robotics and AV, since 2008, the region has had more than 85 different company expansions. Even just over the last week, the Pittsburgh Robotics Network had announced that over 100 of the local institutions have joined their network, which really show the promise of being a true ecosystem in this space. Second, and this is emerging, I also own a hybrid. And what we're finding is, the EV market is still so early, but when you look at Pennsylvania's infrastructure, it is well situated to really power the growth of the industry. And so we have suppliers, we have early adopters, we have companies that are actually creating a lot of technologies that will really transform how EVs develop and scale. And the state as a whole is somewhat well positioned to drive that sector. The third, I mentioned this before, where advanced manufacturing is so crucial to who we are as a region. And we see that reflected with just the continued growth of the manufacturing companies and the types of investments that they're making to really adopt all types of technologies to make manufacturing more contemporary. Things that really are also a backbone of the region are obviously the world-class institutions, but even within the universities, the specific areas of research that they conduct that really show just an intensity around deep technologies and advanced sciences, and something that is a true asset to our region. Assets that really support direct autonomous technologies include the work at Traffic 21, Argo AI Center for Autonomy, Metro 21. All of these things are just samples of assets that really strengthen our region. Now I'll speak to talent. We have over 1.3 million workers and nearly 500,000 millennials, and that talent pool then continues to grow. We have a pretty affordable tech talent wage compared to more expensive markets. And something that you're going to see a continued slew of announcements are around new tech training providers that are truly making equity real in the work that we do with ERA, Perscolas, Resilient Coders, and Apprenti, all announced over the last few months. And so we think that is an exciting addition to the market. When you see a lot of the press on Pittsburgh, you really see kind of the out of work experience that the talent has here, the creatives that want to be here. All of this is really making us a place where true arts and sciences come together in a special way. And so you can't separate that from the fact that the technology that's being created here is also really redefining. And so all of the things that people want in a great place, parks, theater, music, that is really developed in sync with neighborhoods that are where technology is booming and where companies are investing so that they can really ensure that both of our sides of our brain are fulfilled. The next I'll speak to is really the strategic location of. Obviously, when you visit Pittsburgh, you'll see rail lines everywhere, so you can pretty much get easy access to all the major markets. But within 500 miles of our region, you pretty much can tap most of, or a large percentage of the U.S. population. And that's important for companies that are looking to not only just produce within the region, but deploy either their products, services, or goods to the markets that matter the most. And you see this really reflected here. And also, we're a short flight from all the major hubs of technology on the East Coast. You've heard reference to our airport. They're also undergoing a quite transformative investment with over $1 billion new terminal modernization project that will make sure that the gateway for when people first enter the region via airlines, that they really see and experience what makes Pittsburgh special from the moment they land. And you've heard reference over the session to different developments that are structured around supporting innovation within this space. And that we have plenty of opportunities and plenty of developments underway that are purely in support of tech and innovation and support for the autonomous industries. And so all of this really makes the right environment for you to partner with with myself and with DCED and with others to really invest in the region. And obviously, everything that you can think of, we have some type of program or some type of partnership that is well positioned to provide that support. And so use this as really an open invitation to have conversations with us to really see how you can invest here within the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that, especially a guy from Pittsburgh. Appreciate your, and all the assets and all the things that you guys do on a daily basis, and we appreciate working with you and your folks. I thought if it's okay that that pretty much concludes our presentations, but we'd love to have a some questions thrown in the chat box if folks do have questions. That certainly, if you do that, we can have our chat moderator Jeffrey Bergston bring them up on the chat and let you guys know what's being asked. But I can kind of get started off if that's okay with a couple of the questions that we have here. First one, I'd like to throw this to Audrey, if you don't mind, Audrey. But
Okay.
feel free, Vincent, Mark, feel free to jump in also after Audrey is done. But some of the again, being with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, what are some of the steps, Audrey, you think that the state can take in the near term, in the near future, to really start to push this technology, to push the implementation of this technology, more than we have. I know we're doing this event. We try to do the AV Summit. But
Right.
what are some other things that we can do throughout the various departments, to really push AV in a much bigger way?
Well, first of all, I do want to commend you for not only convening this, but talking every other month, as you've said, that you're going to bring people together. I think that's really important. Just having that constant reinforcement is critical. It's just, pattern, right? Pattern recognition, and people start to say, oh, I mean, I think that's important. The other thing is, as I mentioned earlier, is that, we can't go back and think about subsidies, right? We can't go back to that model of economic development and inbound, right? We've got to be out there highlighting. And I think one of the things that we could all work on with your leadership is getting out there, right? Meeting some of the companies that I mentioned before that don't have a shingle here, right? And talking with our assets, particularly what I know in southwestern Pennsylvania, the companies that have been, part of the automotive industry for, 100 years. Talk to them about who their market partners are, who is downstream and upstream for them, so that we can start to really partner with them as well, so that they can see the assets. Because one of the biggest things that we've seen through COVID is that the supply chain breakage, and it's still there. I mean, even just this morning, I was talking to someone about getting computers, and they were talking about the delay in the supply chain. So it's not as though we've rectified that, but I think, corporate boardrooms are talking about security and they're talking about supply chain. And any way that we can nest that closer to these innovators, I think through your leadership, Dennis, and understanding who's all the different departments, I think we can start to have new conversations. I think we have to spin all these plates at the same time. And I think we can do it.
Secretary Davitt, if I might, I agree with Audrey that, again, thank you for your leadership. I think there are other things that even through DCED that we could be doing as a state to really kind of perhaps quantify the downstream benefits of doing this in a very real way. One of the most compelling presentations I've ever seen was for a transit CEO from an Asian country who knew the value of every he knew the value of every single one of the rides that he was providing to the GDP of his region. So he could quantify what the economic downstream effect of good connectivity or good mobility, good transportation was. And I think if we started to really kind of articulate that for ourselves, maybe explore them, it may be too early, but we know that, for example, someone getting to a medical appointment on time perhaps means that they don't go to an emergency room, and there's an economic drag associated with that. Or the fact that if you're caught an hour in traffic, or if you're waiting for a bus ride for an hour, there's an economic drag effect to that. And if we can start quantifying those downstream benefits in dollars and cents, then we can start thinking about what the return on investment is going to be when we start actually deploying this technology. It's very important because, again, thank you for the comment earlier, but it's about making the business case for this and thinking, expansively about what that business case means beyond just the A to B.
Yeah, good point. The economic impact. I mean, when we look at economic impact studies, and we share some of that with the legislature in certain instances for projects or programs and things like that. That's really what resonates. When you can really identify that. So appreciate that. Mark, anything to add to that?
Yeah, a couple of things. I do think autonomous vehicles is inevitable at this point. So I think we can look at just the disruption that's happened in technology in the last 20 years and see where this is heading. I think government will definitely have to be a good partner with business because I think we don't always know what we don't know as far as how we adopt this innovation. And so having some flexibility to really engage the way you all have, really, I think is important.
Great. And we have, do you want to read out some of the questions we have in the chat?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Yep.
In fact, there are a couple, Secretary. So the first one is curious about your thoughts on human compliance of autonomous vehicles. In other words, will the passenger let the vehicle make all the choices and decisions, such as speed and merging behavior? I think this probably speaks to the different levels of automation through SAE, but I'll let the panelists respond.
But why don't we start with Vincent first, and then we'll go around.
Thank you. I'm going to come at this with my perhaps my transit bias, but I think it'll depend on the use case, right? I think if we're talking about fleet operated vehicles, then we're not going to have to worry about that. I think this is more of a discussion of the single occupancy vehicle, and I guess the proof is going to be in the pudding. I think that human intervention is going to be important, kind of at the individual SOV level. But I don't think it'll be quite that important, or the worry of the traveler at the end of the day in a fleet application, in a transit application, because presumably then you'll have professional drivers or professional attendants, because they won't really be driving, who will be monitoring the systems any more than you worry about what's going on in the cockpit when you're in an airplane. You're letting the pilot and the air traffic controller and the ground controllers worry about that aspect. You're just sitting back and hopefully having your martini.
And the computers.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep. And the computers.
Yeah. Mark, what do you think? Anything?
I don't know if I'm the one that can make that call.
How about you, Audrey?
No, I agree.
Yeah.
I think Vince nailed it. I think sometimes that we're getting ahead of ourselves in terms of the what ifs. And I think Vince nailed it. We can think of iterations all day long.
Good point. Jeffrey, others?
Yes, there's actually a comment, and this was not teed up, but Bert Larman says, I enjoy having these talks. However, with most of these talks, they're mostly one-sided, leaning towards urban metro areas. What are your thoughts for rural areas on the topics that were discussed today? And we can try to attempt to answer that, but I'll just put in a plug that our very next webinar on August 12th is going to be dealing with rural and suburban applications. So we are going to address that in detail for our very next webinar. But if the panelists want to chime in on any thoughts about rural applications, that would be welcome.
Well, if I start, I'm afraid I won't stop. So because this is it's a great question. I think, first of all, it goes back to some of the assumptions that I was running through. in my presentation. I think if we're not adopting and adapting this technology to all of our community styles or all of our community forms, we're doing ourselves a societal disservice. And so we have to think beyond just necessarily urban applications. I think there are very clear applications in suburbia, for example, in suburban applications where you're thinking about perhaps first mile, last mile applications. And in terms of rural access, particularly in our region, and as the executive director of the MPO, I worry about the rural. I'm looking at the map of the region, and I worry about the rural counties as much as I do certainly Allegheny, because we're all part of a fabric. We have to think about how this technology can be, again, formed and adapted to the right environment. One of the things that we were starting to look at when I was at FTA, for example, was what if, for example, and it could be applied in any region that has a small or a large city and a large rural community, but what if you could start to maybe connect those communities through automated bus rapid transit? Some of the notional calculations, and again, this is still notional at this point, but maybe you can get an automated bus rapid transit system that has the throughput or the level of service of a heavy rail system at 40 or 50% of the capital costs. Now you're talking about being able to perhaps reach parts of your region that were unreachable at one point or not economically reachable. And again, thoughtfully applying that technology. Again, in the suburban environment, thinking about how do I get someone to perhaps use an automated shared vehicle that is responsive to some stop that's very near where they live, or maybe right to their door, depending on the way you adopt or you provide service, that gives them that convenience that we all expect from the automobile, that you're somehow helping them not burn a gallon of gas to go buy a quart of milk, that you're making those connections. If you think about it, we drive for three reasons. We drive because we enjoy the act of driving, whether it's, getting behind the wheel and doing your stick shift or whatever, we enjoy that aspect. We drive because it's an instant gratification of our need for mobility. It's there, the car is there waiting for you. And we drive also because that automobile says something about who we are as a person for many people. There's an ego element, a human ego element here too. With automated vehicles, you're basically starting to reduce the first one. You're arguably eliminating the need to own the vehicle, and you're providing instant gratification of the need to travel. So you're giving people in different environments access to that mobility that they absolutely need in a very constructive, perhaps, and efficient way. And so adapting it to different environments is super important. I'll stop here because, as I said,
you're raising really good points, and obviously, Vincent, you know a lot about this compared to myself, at least. I do need innovation, and most of the innovative technology companies, if you look at a concentric circle, the epicenter is actually in the urban area. So I do have to say that. And so, the propensity to have a strong urban core helps a whole region. So I don't think we can be dismissive of that. I do appreciate this, particularly in COVID with the lack of internet. The lack of internet just was so heightened, the awareness, and the fact that we were lagging in 5G really caused the kinds of disparities that were pretty horrific and remain horrific. So I think it's all of that, right? It's transit, it's access to technology as well. But we are, and people who tend to mostly work in innovation work because they're bumping into other people. It's a more dense kind of ecosystem. So I don't want to be de minimis in terms of the importance of rural, particularly when you paint the picture of southwestern Pennsylvania with like this nucleus, and then it becomes rural very, very quickly. And I think I appreciate the question being asked, but I don't want to make up anything that doesn't really speak to that.
Great. I want to say a couple things. So I think there is hope. And the reason being, when you look at the overall innovation that's happening, is cars, is shuttles. I have a business school classmate that has an autonomous tractor company for agricultural companies, right? And so I feel like when you step back, obviously in our region, we have a lot of coverage of like the core innovation that's happening. But I do think the technology has potential across rural and urban environments. The second piece is of the 30 plus universities within our region, all of them want to be part of the innovation economy. And so there's an opportunity to make sure that they're training students, that they're also actively helping shape the ecosystem with us. And I think each of the 10 counties within the region want to be a player in that technology.
Good point. Good point. Next question, Jeffrey.
Yes, this could be for any of them, any of the panelists, but probably Mark. It says, how do we get the companies working in this space to create demonstration projects of the technology in an effort to garner public support? And then there's an additional comment. I remember Skybus, a demonstration project from the 60s that was in South Park. Also, can we point to places where this technology is being used? For example, can we say, if you rode transit at Disney World, then you were on an automated vehicle?
Yeah, well, we'll say that that does require a close public-private partnership because obviously the regulatory environment has enabled that type of testing. And I think the city in particular, and the county and the state have done a good job of working with the existing companies with cars on the roads. And as a newer person to Pittsburgh, it was something exciting to see. Like you felt like you're part of something just by seeing the cars on the street. And so definitely as the technologies continue to want to test, the more we can collaborate to ensure things can be done safely while demonstrating that we're a place where that innovation is happening, the better.
I think, and I'll just jump in. I mean, I had a chance. I don't know how many other people on the webinar had a chance, but I had a chance to be in one of the Uber self-driving vehicles about 2.5 years ago. I think about 2.5 years ago, and it was absolutely amazing. And it looked, going into moving into traffic, braking, stopping, cars coming at you every way. And they really have this technology is really, really good. It's not perfect. And I think to Audrey's point about traffic fatalities and things like that, if there's at that point in time, there was one fatality in Arizona, and that really shut down everything. And that was a terrible thing. Obviously any fatality is terrible. We have to also look at how we continue to push the technology so it gets even better and better. And again, I think Audrey brought up some really good points about that.
Well, think about this. I mean, how do you ever go on a plane and ask the pilot how much of this is autonomous or not?
Right.
Right? Do we go on a train and do the same thing?
Right. Yeah. Good point. Good point. Jeffrey, other questions?
There are actually. The next question is, the land use implications of AV are going to be significant. For communities that are just beginning a comprehensive plan update, can you suggest one or two things that communities might need to address in the next 10 years or so?
Wow.
Vince.
That's a natural one for me. Well, yes, I do think that folks are going to have to consider curb space and accommodating particularly package delivery, what I like to call micro freight, because I do think that that's going to be kind of the thin edge of the wedge in terms of adoption of autonomous technologies and autonomous vehicles. I think we'll see that first. And so I think that's what communities are going to have to grapple with first. If they can get their arms around that, I think it'll lead to, kind of better adoption later on of broader single occupancy vehicles or transit. But yeah, thinking about the use of the curb space, how to ensure that you're not going to be, I'm an old computer gamer, and there used to be a game called Frogger, if you remember. You had to cross the street, and if you don't want your communities to look like that, then you'll have to really kind of adopt and adapt to that and figure out how you want to do your planning, how you want to do your streetscaping to prevent that kind of kind of scenario, that doomsday or dystopian scenario.
Well, I think it's a good question in terms of, I mentioned earlier that, planning and economic development, it's not backwards looking. We can't go look backwards on how we used to do it. We just can't. And it's not going to tell us how we move forward. We can't have long range plans that are 5 to 10 years out. We actually can't. So I think that's sort of the tricky part of getting people educated, having these kinds of conversations and being nimble. And that costs money. And hopefully during this period of time with infrastructure money being allocated and run through the states, that we'll have some opportunities to do some short-term kind of planning, which is a big mind shift, right? In terms of, municipalities and governments. They're not used to that. Things take longer. And we have a small window to sort of make some of these changes. So I think those points are well taken, but we can't look backwards for tomorrow.
Audrey, that's a great point. I mean, and Vincent, you deal with this every single day. I mean, our long range planning is getting shorter and shorter and shorter, and we have to. And again, to your point, we have a lot of money at the state level that is stuck in our bank account. The legislature decided to put it in our bank account for use for a variety of different things in the future. And, we want to shake some of that loose for a number of different things. But this is one of the initiatives we think might be good value, and again, there's an infrastructure package coming out that, at some point in time that we're going to have funding to do some fairly significant things. So we have to think about this now and really come up with some ideas and thoughts now.
Well, exactly right. To both of your points, it's like, up until now, and you're right, our windows are becoming shorter and shorter, and our budgets are more and more constrained.
Right.
And what we find ourselves doing is that we're doing reactive planning as opposed to proactive planning, if you will. And so you're behind the 8 ball from word go. And that's just a terrible place to be. Now, how do we get ahead of that power curve? I guess that's for a broader discussion. That'd be actually something interesting to.
Right. And I think that's learning from business, right? I mean, it's learning from business. It very often, the business, public-private partnerships are essential to all of us, but it's in business, you're nimble all the time. You're resilient all the time.
You have to be.
Yep.
Yep. So just one other question. I think if we can probably make this the last question. I think we have to wrap up here. But in terms of a lot of AI jobs and the types of jobs that are developed with AI, the thought is when we hear this a lot about the AI taking away human jobs, taking away the driver, taking away the bus driver, taking away other types of jobs. Just in your a couple thoughts from you folks about dealing with that and about some things that we need to maybe communicate better about why AI is not going to do that. And my first thought is because somebody has to build these systems and somebody has to maintain these systems. But what are there other things that we need to be thinking about?
Well, they're job creators. These new roles are all job creators. They eliminate the jobs that most people don't want to do, and they eliminate. If you look at trucking, look at the trucking industry, for example. The trucking industry has a near like 100% turnover rate right now. I mean, you talk to anyone who's managing that business, and then I tell you to go talk to the guys over at Locomation and see what they are trying to do in terms of connectedness and autonomy. And the kinds of people that work at, believe it or not, some of the early hires over at Locomation were truck drivers. Why? Because they had the knowledge, they understand the entire mile, not just the first mile. They understand the entire piece, and they're the ones who are shaping that innovation. So, you know, we don't tell those stories enough. And I think that's what people really need to hear. So the opportunity for having beyond living wages, right, and then working in innovation and having equity in companies and doing these kinds of things, who would have thought 10 years ago that, you know, the turnover rate's this high in trucking, and we now are at a point where everyone's getting everything delivered to their home. So the demand is at its highest, and we don't have drivers. And then look at all the innovation that's occurred from last mile drivers, of people building their own companies and working with Amazon so that they can be last mile drivers. So we are not eradicating jobs. That is not happening. There's no fact based to that. Yes, we are eliminating jobs that people don't want to do anymore, or too hard to do, or too redundant to do, or maybe too risky to do. But we are not, we are creating new. And it's just a matter of us repositioning ourselves to that reskilling and that refocus on those opportunities.
Thank you for that.
I think Audrey summed it up well, and I think us really introducing people to a new generation of opportunities is really important. Coming from a blue collar family myself, all my uncles and my own father, I think of how smart they were and how they would be open to areas if someone had introduced them to. I think we have to make sure we don't forget to do that this time.
Yeah, good point. Well, I think we're kind of coming to a close. So I wanted to thank you guys, Audrey, Mark, Vincent. You guys did a great job. Really appreciate you know, your time and effort and putting together these presentations. You guys are fantastic, and we're probably going to call on you again at some point in time to do this, because you did such a great job.
Oh,
So
no
real-
deed, no deed goes unpunished. Thank
That's
you.
right. That's right. Really appreciate that. So we also have at the end of the webinar, you should be receiving a professional development hours certification from Chad Martin. And the next webinar will be held August 12th over the topic of suburban and rural applications, as we mentioned, suburban and rural applications of automated vehicles. That event will be moderated by Dr. Jill Haug from Upper Great Plains Transportation Institute. More information, registration links will be sent out in the future. And as always, check the PAAVsummit.org website for all updates. We have a great list of speakers and topics in store ramping up to the summit in October, and we hope to see you again at our upcoming events. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating. We'll see you soon.